You know, people who have joined are waiting. We want to start it up now. So welcome to the third online event that the Wooden Shoe has at least been part of in the past year. And this is our first online event that we're actually hosting. And you know, we actually just created the Zoom account this past week because we realized, like, all right, a year later, we're still doing these events remotely, so we might as well have a way for us to do more of these and to connect with people, since we can't host events in our space in Philly like we would prefer to be doing. So here we are. And if you never heard of the Wooden Shoe, we are an all-volunteer anarchist collective here in Philadelphia, founded in 1976. And we've hosted an event, I think a few years ago, with Mitch Abidor, when his, I think, last book came out on AK Press. So welcome back.
It's actually, this is my third time here.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's right. I think that was before my time.
Right.
Great. So yeah, that's pretty much, I guess, the other thing I want to say about the Wooden Shoe is for folks in Philly, if you want to check out any of Mitch's books or Vicky's new book, we have them for sale. So it's 704 South Street. And for those of you who are outside of Philly, we are starting to do online ordering more. So all that information is on our website, which is woodenshoebooks.org. And yeah, that's all really I wanted to say about the Wooden Shoe. And now, yeah, I want to just welcome you all again and briefly introduce Mitch and Vicky, and then let them take it from there. So here we are, one day right after the official 150th anniversary of the Paris Commune, and so that's why we're all here to have this discussion. So Mitch Abidor has published over a dozen volumes of translation, as well as May Made Me, an oral history of May '68. A contributing writer for Jewish Currents, his articles have also appeared in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, Dissent, and many others. His I'll Forget It When I Die, the Brisbane deportation of 1917, will be published by AK Press in the spring. And Vicky Osterweil is a writer, editor, and agitator based here in Philadelphia. Her first book, In Defense of Looting, was released in August 2020 by Bold Type Books. Her work has appeared in Real Life, The New Inquiry, Al Jazeera America, Dissent, The Baffler, and the Paris Review. So everyone, welcome Mitch and Vicky.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really an honor and pleasure to be here with Mitch tonight. I have a fair number of his translations on my shelf, and yet more of them as PDFs in my computer. So it was very, very exciting to be asked to do this, and also to be trusted to talk about this very, very important event that we're here to celebrate the anniversary of. And I think, maybe in some ways both commemorate and critique and think through maybe in different ways than you have before. So yeah, it's the 150th anniversary of the Commune, and I think, Mitch, I think we talked about getting started. We're just going to launch into it. Unless you have other introductory remarks you'd like to make.
No, I mean, the only thing I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Matt for setting this up, Vicky for you, for the conversation. But also, there's another advantage to doing events this way, Matt. Parking is much easier.
Yeah.
When you don't have to do it.
Parking on South Street's really a drag. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this was great. This is great.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll just give a few remarks about sort of where my relationship to the Commune is. Like, I think my first real activist experience in a really big active way, although I was already organizing to some extent, was during Occupy and also during 2011 in Barcelona. And I think at that point, the movement of the squares got compared a lot. Occupy got compared a lot to the Paris Commune. There was sort of a brief upsurge of interest in it. And then I think it faded back into obscurity, which isn't surprising for an event that happened over 70 days, 150 years ago. But I think which has also loomed very, very large in the minds of revolutionaries, particularly French ones, but I think all over the world ever since. So Mitch, do you want to like just sort of give us a quick talk about what those events were so that people have some context before we get totally lost in the weeds that I think we
Sure.
both adore digging through? Yeah.
Sure. So the Paris Commune. So first I want to explain the name because, you know, yesterday my assumption was that people had all this background information, but even just the name of the Paris Commune is not really all that clear. Why was it called a commune? So, and it wasn't because it was like a group of people all sitting in a building or they shared stuff communally. All it is a form of municipal government. And so it was it was just the Paris Commune. There are still now communes all over the world. You know, there are cities that call themselves communes, and that's what this was. So, so there's nothing mysterious about that. So I want to give the historical background of just how the Paris Commune came to be. Was France had been living under Napoleon III since under his dictatorship since 1851. 1870, he provokes war with Prussia, and the French army, which thinks it's going to win pretty easily, is instead crushed pretty easily. So after the French army is defeated, Napoleon III is imprisoned, Paris is besieged. And at the end of the siege, the French surrender, and the French are the government it's a government of national defense. It's a republic, and they then on March 18th, just to jump ahead, because there are other issues involved that Vicky and I'll get to. On March 18th, they decide the cannons that have been used to defend Paris. There were 250s around Paris. They decide they're going to gather up, take all the cannons away from the neighborhoods. And when in the morning of March 18th, they show up in Montmartre, which was a working class neighborhood at the time, the people in the neighborhood, starting with the women, which is going to be another theme we'll discuss later, start fighting the soldiers. You can't take our cannons. We paid for them, and you're not taking them. Things get a little bit out of hand, and two generals are executed. By the end of that day, the people and the National Guard, which was the popular army, not the regular army, it was the people in arms, occupy Paris's Hotel de Ville, and they announced that there's going to be elections to a council of the commune. The commune, which had been first called for in January of 1871, they're going to hold elections. A week later, on March 26th, there are the elections to the commune. People from every arrondissement in Paris, except for one, elect representatives to the commune. The government, so they now have a working class government, although we have to come back to this question also, whether it was really a working class government. So there's now the people have elected their own government, but only in Paris. There were communes that were set up elsewhere in France, but they didn't last very long. So the Paris Commune was the only one that lasted. They elect a council, the Council of the Commune, which sets out, which implements or passes all kinds of fabulous measures, and it's the reason why it's come down to us today, is these great measures that it passed. The members of the Commune, and we'll come back to which were the parties that were in it, were mainly people who had spent the previous 20 years opposing Napoleon III. So this is a highly politicized crowd. Many of them are educated, what would later be called intellectuals, all politically active, all with a history also of being at each other's throats. Because, well, leftists never change. They'll always be the same. And this will explode a little bit over the course of the commune. So they passes all these measures. In the meanwhile, all the communes that are around, the other communes around France have all failed. So now the main government, which fled, actually today it's an anniversary, Matt. Today is the day that the French government fled Paris for Versailles. So it was the government that was in Versailles, the official government, let's call it. Within a couple of weeks, they start attacking, bombarding Paris. So the commune has to both build a new society, build a new government, and fend off attacks. They do a number of sorties, none of them work. And on May 21st, the walls of Paris are breached. It begins what's known as the Bloody Week. And so the forces from Versailles managed to work their way through Paris, killing pretty much everybody they see who's got a gun or who was behind a barricade. 20,000 people are killed in the final week of the Commune. And it was on May 28th that the final defenders of the Commune were killed. 147 people were killed against the walls in Père Lachaise Cemetery in what's now known as the Mur des Fédérés. And if anybody has gone to Paris and gone to Père Lachaise Cemetery, you know, it's all the way in the back of the cemetery. It has a beautiful plaque saying to the dead of the Commune. Around that wall are buried leaders of the Commune and leaders of the French working class movement, and a few rows away, Edith Piaf, just to throw that one in. So after the defeat of the Commune on May 28th, slaughter continues all around France, all around Paris, rather. So as I said, 20,000 people die in that final week. People are exiled, arrested, executed. 6 members of the Council of the Commune were killed during that week. But many flee into exile. Belgium was the place that most of them went to. And then they weren't allowed back till 1879 was an amnesty. So and in that interim period, the French working class movement is just completely stifled, stymied, can't go anywhere because all the leadership is in exile. And just to give an idea of how brutal the Bloody Week was, there were two, you know, I have an account here by the American ambassador to France. And this is how he described what went on when the Commune was defeated. After 8 of the most horrible days the world has ever known, the suppression of the insurrection was finished yesterday afternoon. The whole thing has been awful beyond description and perhaps human belief. There's been nothing but a general butchery since Wednesday last. Men, women, and children, innocent and guilty alike. The rage of the soldiers and the people knows no bounds. No punishment is too great or too speedy for the guilty, but there's no discrimination. Let a person utter a word of sympathy or even let a man be pointed out to the crowd as a sympathizer, and his life is gone. People were so out of control. The wealthy of Paris was so enraged by what had gone on that there are accounts by people who were sympathetic to or enemies of the Commune, of women walking around with, how do you call them in English? Comme ça se dit en anglais? Parasols, poking people's eyes out, poking the dead people's eyes out. And the government was so enraged also, the government that had been in Versailles, that even people who were dead received the death penalty after they were dead. Because when people were killed, there were just bodies piled everywhere. You weren't certain. So just to make certain that the enemy was dead, death penalties were passed in absentia. So if they did turn out to still be alive, they could still be killed. So there was the path of the Commune.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as a result, one of the, you know, it's often told as a tragedy, I think is largely how it gets told, both by the left and the right. The tragedy from the right's perspective is that the Commune, in sort of many of their sort of non-organized, non-governmental actions, burnt down really famous buildings, really important plazas, lit fire to the guillotines, attacked government buildings and symbols of the empire, and eventually church property, although that was mostly as the noose was tightening. They actually were surprisingly, considering how many of them were Blanquists and Jacobins, were surprisingly restrained early on in terms of lethal justice.
Right, and in fact, on that point, Vicky, the commune was in a strange way, not very respectful of legality, but also very respectful of human life.
Yeah.
So, for example, it took a whole bunch of hostages, not an outrageous number of hostages, at the very beginning of the commune, including the Archbishop of Paris. And there was 100 and some odd hostages. And they took the hostages with, after passing a law that if communard soldiers, soldiers of the commune were killed, that they would kill the hostage in response. So it would be like 1 for 1, but they never did it. And in fact, we were talking about Blanqui, the great revolutionary hero of the first 70 years or so of the 19th century, had been imprisoned since January of 1871 because Blanqui, the man who thought the revolution was next Thursday, no matter when it was, the revolution was next Thursday. Unfortunately, he missed the revolution because he had one of his usual small, ridiculous plots that had been crushed pretty quickly in January. He was in jail. So the commune said, we'll give you all the hostages we have, and we'll trade them all just for Blanqui. Give us Blanqui and you could have them all. Yeah. And the government of Versailles refused to do it because they knew that people would rally around Blanqui. But another matter of legality was, when the commune took over, they then had control of the Bank of France. And like any government, the commune needed money. They had to pay for food. They had to pay the members of the National Guard. They had to pay pensions. When soldiers were killed, they gave money to the families. Yet they never touched the money in the Bank of France. And it's one of the things that over the decades after the commune, was reproached, that the survivors of the commune said, if only we would have taken the money, but we were just too respectful of what was, and we weren't radical enough to actually take the money. Actually this is like, they should have looted, pardon my saying so, the Bank of France.
I mean, I think that's, of all of the agreed upon mistakes, of all of the debated mistakes of the commune, that one seems really obvious to me. And we'll try not to do this too much because I think it's really facile to make a lot of like comparisons. I think, as we've talked about, and as we're about to talk about, it's been 150 years. Like, we can't build barricades in our urban centers and fight off platoons. Like, there's not a lot of, but like, as a tactical lesson, in Seattle during the uprising this summer, during the Chaz, they took that territory and they had the police station within it. And much like the communards failed to take the bank, in the Chaz this summer, they failed to attack the police station, to even enter it. People protected it from even being entered, let alone destroyed, abolished. And I think that is maybe a reflection. Maybe that was also a mistake in a certain way. But anyway, that's to jump from 2020 to long before. I think you said in your new tablet piece that the generals are often fighting the last war, is a common cliche about the military. And I think, the French are maybe the only Western nation with a really long and storied tradition of urban rebellion. So I think, you've argued a lot that the people in the commune were fighting previous revolutions without getting too bogged down in all the details, which we both love. What would you how would you sort of think about, before we move on to the commune again, the legacy of the French Revolution, 1848, 1831, these moments?
Right. Well, we'll just give you an idea of how enthralled to the French Revolution, to a certain element of the French Revolution, not so much 1789, but even 1789, I have to say. Excuse me, but the period of when Robespierre was in power was for most of the members of the Council of the Commune really the height. The way some people today still talk about the Bolsheviks in October of 1917. For the Commune, it was really like 1791, 1792, 1793, and Robespierre, and they would never, well, actually, no, I have to say, they would call it the terror because that was really what it was known of, and there was no shame or embarrassment in calling it the terror. So when I said that there was the elections to the Commune, there were three main factions within the Commune. The biggest faction was just straight out neo-Jacobins. They defined themselves that way. And to ask, yesterday somebody said, what does that even mean? And it's really hard to say. It's just radical republicanism and a fervent defense of the most disadvantaged. But when you say you're a Jacobin, there's nothing socialist about the Jacobins. And it's what I realized when I've been talking about this, that I've left out that part of it, that whether the Commune was even socialist in any way, people just assume it was. But when the main faction was the neo-Jacobins, the second faction were the Blanquists. And the Blanquists described themselves as Jacobins also. So, and nobody has ever accused Robespierre of having been a socialist. They imposed a maximum price on subsistence goods, but that was about it, because there were no factories for them to nationalize anyway. So those were the two biggest factions. The minority faction was the members of the International, the First International. But in Paris, in France, there were no anarchists except for the Proudhonians, and they're barely anarchist. And there were almost no Marxists in France. So the supporters of the Commune were kind of like the other two. They were supporters of the French Revolution. They loved Robespierre. There's a great story in the memoirs of one of the communes, one of the members of the memoirs of somebody who's a newspaper editor. And he talked about the story where he went to somebody's office and he heard screaming and chairs being knocked over. And it was just a horrible scene and he couldn't figure out what's going on in this office. And when they came out, the people had their glasses were crooked. Somebody had said something bad about Robespierre. And that was what it turned into. So the French Revolution really served as their framework, but it was everywhere. Even Blanqui, in the period when Paris was under siege, he had a newspaper, and this was the most radical revolutionary person in France. He had a newspaper called La Patrie en danger, the fatherland is in danger, which was a Jacobin cry when France was being attacked by the coalition. And even in January, when there was the first call for the Commune by the members of the International in what was called the Red Poster, they accused the government of national defense of not being patriotic enough, of not calling for a levée en masse, having all the people go out and fight the Prussians, because everybody viewed the French Republic as the heir of the Great French Revolution. And this is where France differs, from 1789 up until World War I, at least. The whole attitude towards the nation and patriotism is completely different, because whereas in Russia, you could be a revolutionary defeatist, because who wants to defend the Tsar? That in France, you're defending the Republic, and the Republic is Robespierre, and the Republic is Babeuf, and the Republic is Saint-Just and Marat. So they have a whole different relationship with to patriotism and the nation. So, and all that comes out of the French Revolution.
That's really helpful, and I think that's really valuable, because I think one of the things that we want to do when we look at it is to underline all of its genuinely present internationalist tendencies, right? So, as you said, like members of the International were there. There were no national restrictions on who could participate in the commune itself. And many, especially like Elizabeth Dmitrieff, famously, who had just come literally from London, where she had been studying with Marx, then arrives at the commune and is a major player there. But much like the contradiction between a strong nationalist sentiment that was sort of humiliated in the Franco-Prussian War, combined with a kind of sort of emergent internationalism, proletarian internationalism, that's one contradiction. Another big contradiction that I think reflects the time was sort of the role of gender and women. I bring up Dmitrieff, but one of the most famous images of the commune is the Pétroleuses, who is a gangs of women with Molotov cocktails lighting fire to French monuments. Obviously, the very first moment that we talked about, it was women fraternizing with the National Guard who defended the cannons, and that also goes back to the French Revolution, when it was a bread riot largely led by women that led to the storming of the Bastille. So that tradition. So we have, at the one hand, they're not allowed on the commune, they're not unelectable, they are not citizens in the same way, but they're also intense participants. Could you talk more about that?
Sure, and there's because everybody talks about Louise Michel.
Yeah.
And Louise Michel, she ran an ambulance corps during the commune, but she was not yet an anarchist, because I said there was no anarchist movement in France yet. And she didn't become an anarchist till she went to New Caledonia, when she was deported to New Caledonia. But there were women's organizations that was set up in all the arrondissements of Paris. The most important figure was, as you said, Elizabeth Dmitrieff, who was in March of 1871, had been delegated by Marx to go see what was going on in France. So women had no right to vote. Women couldn't sit on the commune, and officially they couldn't be in the National Guard either. But women were at the barricades. There are tons of pictures of people, at the barricades. And, you were talking about the Pétroleuses. And as I told you a couple of days ago, there's some question as to whether or not they even existed, these women going around setting fire to buildings. That these buildings were set fire to is absolutely, unquestionable. Whether they were set fire to by women, by these Pétroleuses, is less clear. However, it does show that whether they existed or not, women had become feared. So if they set the fires, well, that's one thing. If they didn't set the fires, it didn't matter. The same fear was there. So women had become feared objects, thanks to the commune, because people saw them as like these mad women who were out there, at the barricades. But remember, that in France, freedom and the Republic is represented by a woman, Marianne. And of course, there's Delacroix's famous painting, Liberty Leading the People, and it's a woman. And she's out there on the barricades actually leading the men. So that image of the revolutionary woman, even if she's not just Madame Defarge knitting at the guillotine, in the French imagination, it's a woman also. Now, about women, the commune, and this, I gave a talk on the commune yesterday, and so I'm just going to use the French word. There are no negative connotations here. The commune passed, I have the date here somewhere, towards the end, on May 17th, 1871. The Council of the Commune passed a law granting the same rights to what's called in French concubines as to legitimate spouses, and to children, whether they were born, within marriage or without. They were all considered to be the same. So if somebody was in a common law marriage, or whatever the word is now, I'm an old man, so common law marriage is the word that comes to mind. and the husband, the partner, there it is, that's the word in English now, partner. If the partner was killed, then whether they were married or not, the common law wife, the partner, would still be able to be paid a pension. So they did, they had a whole different vision of the role of women, but it only went so far.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's that's really valuable too. Another thing, and I think we can just sort of do this a bit quickly, but women also insisted on and led to the first creation of the creche, which I think is a more common term in European countries, but it's just it's basically childcare, it's daycare, and also the institution of universal public secular education was also a big deal for the Commune, and is often cited by the French Republic as like, we take this from the Commune. This is the Commune gave us our education system, which I think is arguable in a lot of different ways. But do you want to talk really quickly about, before we move forward to legacies,
Sure.
about the laws that were passed,
right.
and then go for it.
Because in America, especially since I remember when FDR was president, when we were talking about the first 100 days was like a big deal. Now the Commune only lasted 72 days. But so here are the most important measures that they passed. Hopefully I can read my handwriting. I can ask my wife if she can help me out here. So on March 29th, so that's, they abolished conscription. And also they returned, and these are measures that you talk about the legacy, Vicky, things that should be the legacy.
Yeah.
On March 29th, they returned everybody their last 3 months of rent. And also, they closed down the government pawn shop. Then on April 2nd, they decreed the separation of church and state. On April 12th, then all debts that were owed were suspended indefinitely. On April 20th, night work was banned for bakers, a very big move in France. And yesterday, somebody said that we had a similar thing here. I seem to remember that was done for bagel bakers. April 22nd, here's another one that's very current. They requisitioned all vacant lodgings. So everybody should have housing. We're not going to see that there. April 27th, workers can no longer be fined to have parts of their salaries taken back for misdeeds at work. On April 28th, the formation of a commission for the organization of secular education. May 7th, everything that was less than 20 francs that was in the government pawn shop was returned for free. May 16th, the Vendôme column, which was built into the glory of Napoleon I and was built out of melted down cannons that Napoleon and his army had captured, was torn down. I have to come back to that one because there's a great story that goes with it. May 17th was equality of benefits that I just mentioned. And on the 19th was the secularization of education. So there are two things here. Much of this is going on. They're passing laws while they're being bombarded. And so, and it's one of the other things that was later on was the Commune was criticized for, was that there was legislating when it should have just been fighting. But I also want to talk a little bit about the bringing down of the Vendôme column.
Yeah, this is great.
That was organized by Gustave Courbet, who was a member of the Council of the Commune, was the head of the Arts Commission. So essentially they had a ministry. They didn't have ministries, they called them commissions. So he was the Minister of Culture of the Commune. So he was put in charge of bringing down the column. And there are great pictures of it. You can find them pretty easily online, of the column in pieces and people standing on them. And when the Commune was defeated, he was put on trial. And he did not handle himself admirably. We all like to think of revolutionaries as saying, here you want me, just, come shoot me, or, long live the German Communist Party, or whatever, revolutionaries are supposed to say when they're about to be killed or they're put on trial. Courbet said, wasn't me. They made me do it. I'm sorry. It was him. He was just like the bears in the Gary Larson cartoon. So, and they weren't having any of it. So he was found guilty, and he fled to Switzerland. And everything that he left in his studio, all of his paintings, everything was taken by the government to pay for the restoration of the Vendôme column. So,
yeah, and I think
obey.
I think that's a really good way to look at sort of some of the legacies that we'll talk about before we open up to questions, which we will do shortly. But I think, like, you know, we were talking about the Petroluces earlier. One of the things that happened there's a great book called Standing at Armageddon by an American historian, Nell Irvin Painter, where she talks about how in 1877, the Great Upheaval, which is this big labor unrest, women participated, unemployed women, and they were accused of being Petroluses, right? So 6 years later in America, they're still paranoid about these French communards. But yeah, so I think in any case, there's, you know, this tendency for the communards to be interpreted through a lot of different lenses. Most famously, I think the apocryphal story of Lenin doing a dance outside the Winter Palace when the Russian Revolution lasted 72 days, had been a day later than the Commune, a very popular story. So yeah, I think, like, what, you know, we were talking about the sort of the government. You're saying there's sort of all this, you know, there's this anarchist tradition that sort of views it as sort of state abolition, and actually the Commune maybe was moving in some of those directions, but actually was just leaderless. I think you don't think it was at all.
Right.
There's the sort of Bolshevik, you know, there's Engels says this was the dictatorship of the proletariat, this is what it looks like, which Lenin then, you know, and the Leninist project in general in the 20th century turns into something completely different. Do you want to talk about some of that? You get into that in your tablet piece.
Yeah. So, you know, because people, you know, they view the Commune, because there was no leader. You know, as much as they admired Robespierre, maybe had Blanqui been there, he would have been, you know, the leader. But the fact is, it had rotating presidents, and president, I mean somebody who presided over running the debates at the Council of the Commune. And, you know, just to give you an example of how people can get the Commune so wrong, I was in a film of Brecht's great play, Days of the Commune. And the film was subtitled in honor of Occupy. We shot it around the time of Occupy. As if there was any kind of, okay, Leonard, as if there was, you know, there was a similarity between the two. But whereas when the Occupy was a bunch of people sitting in Zuccotti Square and going like this, the Commune, the Council of the Commune, was a regular elected body. As I said, they ran elections. They didn't call them, when they did away with the old bureaucracy, they didn't have departments or ministries, they just called them commissions. They had elections. If somebody resigned a seat, they had another formal election to see who was gonna take their place. And they even, it's one of my favorite little facts, in France, elected officials all wear a sash, the blue, white, and red sash. You can see it when there's, you know, mass marches after there've been some terrorist attack or, you know, whatever. The communards even wore sashes. And when you read the firsthand accounts, the memoirs of members of the Commune, they all talk about, you know, I left the Council of the Commune, but I tied my red sash on. So they had a red sash. So the Commune was, even though it was a different type of government, it was a government. And, you know, and one of the reasons why I don't think that it was moving in the direction of not being a government, I think it's an optimistic way of looking at it, is just the strength of the Blanquists. The Blanquists, you know, you were quoting Vicky from Engels saying it was the dictatorship of the proletariat. In that same afterword to the Civil War in France, Engels writes mockingly of the Blanquists, who were a bunch of, it was a group, a small conspiratorial group that thought that they could make the revolution for the whole country, and eventually the people would catch up with them, which sounds mysteriously like Leninists. So Blanquists were really not interested in doing away with the state. They wanted to have a strong, they were more followers of Babeuf. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but more kind of barrack socialism than anarchism, which doesn't mean, if we're talking, legacy now, that people didn't apply it in good and bad ways, the commune. So the commune was an inspiration to Barcelona in 1936, before the things fell apart pretty badly.
Yeah.
And also, when I did the last time I was here, Wooden Shoe, Matt was with my book on May 68, and was that people in May 68, people had, they weren't living the French Revolution, but the Paris Commune was part of what guided their actions, and not necessarily in both a good way as a form of like a humane form of socialism, but also in the absurdity, you alluded to it before, of the barricades. The image of the Paris Commune is the image of revolution. It's workers behind barricades with guns, and you could do that in 1871. But in 1968, if you look at the barricades, as almost everybody who I interviewed said, we put up these barricades, and they told great stories about how they built them, chains of people carrying bricks. But if you look at the pictures on Rue Gay-Lussac, the barricades are absurd. Militarily, they make no sense. Yeah. Had there really been a threat, because barricades might work, or could only work against an army that's coming straight at you. Had de Gaulle unleashed the army in 68 and the Air Force, those barricades weren't going to do anybody any good. But the students, even leaders like Alain Crevin, told me that it was kind of like an act. We were acting out revolution. And if you're going to act out revolution, you have to build barricades. Otherwise, you can't be a revolutionary.
Right.
So, so the commune had, really set that image for what a working class revolution has to look like. And that's not necessarily been a good thing. As I told you the other day, had, a lot of the stuff that has to do when we talk about the Paris Commune and how people looked at it afterwards, those who participated, sounds very much to me like people who were part of Popular Unity in Chile. And when they look back on what should have been done or what could have been done under Allende, and there was the left that said, we should have given weapons, rifles to the workers, and we would have built barricades. But when you look at the plane flying in and bombing the Moneda Palace, what was a barricade going to do?
Yeah,
So,
and the Chilean anarchist critique is that was lost when Allende disarmed the people in 70. And that by the point that the coup had started, it was much too late. So this is sort of the kind of thing that you have to think about these questions. So yeah, it's been very important.
So Vicky, just one last thing here.
Please.
The Shanghai. There's somebody just made this comment, and this would end up on the end of legacy.
Yeah. The
worst legacy of the Paris Commune. The worst was the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Mao was directly said he wanted to bring the Paris Commune to Shanghai, to Peking. I called it Peking. Look at that. I dated myself again. Because the commune did away with the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And so Mao unleashed the Red Guards to do away with the bureaucracy. And the result of it was millions of dead, cannibalism, and the end of socialism in China.
Yeah, and when something actually looking like the commune did appear in Shanghai, I think as the commenter was saying, the party repressed it. So when something that actually looked like working class proletarian insurrection, which did come in the name of the commune in Shanghai in 67, then was immediately repressed by the party that had actually called for it. So I think that's a lot. We've introduced a lot. I think there's probably plenty for people to ask questions about. I do want to open up the floor to anyone who has questions about anything we've touched on, something we haven't, big things we've missed that you think is important. And I guess we've got a lot of folks here, so maybe throw them in the chat, and I'll ask them. Got comments here, but maybe just throw a question in the chat here.
Right, put all the, okay, from
Mitch?
All right, we got
we have somebody, no, Leonard, we're doing it through the chat, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so Stephen, you're first. Hop on there, Stephen.
Well, Stephen,
I just came in a little bit late. Could you just review what were the precursors to the Paris Commune? What was it that convinced the working class of France to form this government?
well, that's, briefly, since, we discussed it, but, at the beginning, the main thing that set it off, and wait, where's the quote? Here we have it. I have a quote from somebody who's a member of the National Guard and on the elected council. The insurrection of 1871 is still misunderstood. It was first provoked by a patriotic sentiment and by the determination to prevent the monarchical form of government from taking possession of the country. It was the working class had been, Paris and the working class, its working class, had been insulted. First, they had lived under the siege, where they were forced to eat salami made of rats. Then the Prussian army had marched through the streets of Paris, and then Paris had to pay huge indemnities. And then when they came to take the cannons on March 18th, that was like the last straw from the workers. But as I said, even the members of the International had felt that the existing government, the government that had replaced Napoleon III, was not actively defending the Republic, that the Republic could only be defended by the working class. And, we talked about it before, so I don't know if you were here for that. I don't want to, go too much into it, but the defense of the Republic, this would show up even if, would carry through to even would be the explanation that Jaurès would give just before he was assassinated for why the French working class should join in the defense of France should it be attacked by Germany. Because Germany winning is the victory of a monarchical form of government. France winning is another republic in the world because Germany would become a republic. So it's the love of the Republic. And as I try not to use the work of other historians. I like to use the words of the people who participated in the event. But a great historian of the Commune pointed out that the communards always used Republic with a capital R. And because that really was their goal, was the defense of the Republic more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think, just in terms of some other details, just sort of more immediate precedents we haven't talked about during the war in particular, and if you want to read about this, Kristen Ross writes about this, I think, pretty well in her book, Communal Luxury. There were these big meetings in the lead up. I know we both have disagreements with other parts of that book, so I won't get into that, but there is a good part about, in the build up to the Commune, there were these big meetings called Réunions, where they got around political censorship, which they weren't allowed to talk about Napoleon or any of his officers. So one of the ways they actually got around political censorship was by talking more abstractly about the Commune and sort of working class justice and talking sort of bigger meta political questions. So that was one thing that happened. I'm going to quickly just jump on Mike Howard. Can you elaborate further on the lessons Marx drew? That he wrote a great essay called The Civil War in France. I really recommend you read that. I think we're probably not going to get into that though, but it's really there. And that was very influenced by Elizabeth Dmitrieff. Leonard, you're next on stack. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Mitch and I actually united on that film that he talked about, The Days of the Commune, which was Brecht's last play, and which I translated and directed in its premiere on the 50th anniversary of the Commune.
Okay, you got your plug in, Leonard. There you go.
Exactly 50, the 100th anniversary, 50th anniversary.
All right, you
But I want to mention some things that are relevant to the precedents that were set by the commune and the lessons that people learned. We talked about it a little bit yesterday, but Emma Goldman and Rosa Luxemburg were born right around the time of the commune, and they learned from it. Rosa Luxemburg's action that killed her, actually, the German Revolution was in part inspired by that. The Kronstadt Rebellion was in part responded.
This is a Kronstadt-free zone. There are
Yeah, we're
no
in a Kronstadt free
discussions
zone.
of
Yeah, no
Kronstadt.
debates, no sectarian debates.
No discussions of Kronstadt.
All right, let's go. The Spanish Civil War, Mitch.
I said Barcelona. I said
Barcelona,
Yeah.
where Emma Goldman was called the mother of the Spanish exiles. Barcelona and the Spanish Civil War was directly inspired by the Paris Commune. And Nordahl Grieg, a Norwegian playwright, wrote a play called The Defeat, which was the direct inspiration for our Brecht play. Did you know that? Brecht's play was written as a counterplay.
We have to leave the floor to other people. This is a shorter evening than yesterday.
Okay, but I just want you to be aware of some of those descendants of the commune through Nordahl Grieg, through the Spanish Civil War, and Brecht, probably during the Berlin blockade. These are all related to the literary expressions from the commune.
Okay,
Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you, Leonard.
Okay, so here's another question from David. I'm just going to jump around a little bit here. We've got sorry about this. I want to ask, what was the international response? I know it didn't really last long enough for the news to travel, but did foreign leaders comment on it? How was, what was the international response like?
Well, you brought up, the best one was that in 1877 rather,
Yeah,
U.S. still feared it, and Andy just sent out a message that when the deportees were on their way to the Pacific, they were greeted by the workers of Melbourne. Is it Melbourne, Andy? Yeah, so of Melbourne, but I really can't say much about the international response to it, because there were no echoes really. It wasn't like it immediately inspired the workers of Germany, which is what they were hoping for. I mean,
right.
if you go to Marxist.org, where all of my translations, by the way, have been posted by Andy Blunden up here in the top row. They were sending messages to the workers of Germany, join in, but that didn't happen. So again, we have to be careful of a too optimistic a reading of the event, and what effect did it have on the international? But the main thing is it didn't spread.
Yeah.
That as important as Marx's Civil War in France was as a source text later on, at the time I don't see that it had really much influence.
Yeah, and I think that's that's one of the things that's really interesting about it. I think is that it was deeply isolated, right, even within the walls of Paris, basically. But has now 150 years later, here we are on Zoom in a pandemic all over the world talking about it. So it's international. It has been a much more diffuse effect. I think the communards spread all over the world. For example, Louise Michel, the Red Virgin of the Commune, she was in exile in New Caledonia, which is in Australasia, which is off the coast of the eastern coast of Australia. And there, with a bunch of North African workers and indigenous, I think they're Katak people there, joined an anti-colonial uprising, right? So communards were like joining this sort of anti-French, anti-colonial uprising. Again, we're too complicated to get into right now, but like years later. So there's these moments that happen, but in terms of in the immediate as a sort of event, I think, yeah, there wasn't a ton. I'm going to move to Emma Pike, unless you had something more to say, sorry.
Oh, no, that's right.
Okay, yeah. Emma said, you mentioned that there is some debate about whether the commune was genuinely led by the working class. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Right, and this is, we have too liberal a notion or too wide a notion of what the working class is. And if, the working class, our vision of the working class, or the vision, of the, in the classical Marxist vision, although some people like maybe Andy might argue with me here, but did France even have an industrial working class is an open question. And in many ways, the working class, the constitution of what we call the working class, resembled much more in 1871 in France, the sans-culotte of the French Revolution, than it did the industrial working class that was just in the process of formation. So, and in fact, there's, if there are people out here who know French, the great biographical dictionary of the French working class, the great Mitron, has a site for the Paris Commune where it breaks down the occupations of 17,000 communards. And the largest single occupation was construction workers, and there was less than 1,000 of them. And most of the trades that we know the people who were involved in the commune were involved in were artisanal work. They worked in small workshops. So they were leather workers, and they were tanners, they were printers, and
shoemakers and bakers, a lot of shoemakers and bakers.
Right. So whether or not that they were the most disadvantaged of France, they were the poorest people in France, but depending on your vision of the working class, they might not have been it. And that was why when I said at the beginning, right, and the composition of the International was exactly the same way. So because there was not big industrial capital in most places, outside of England, the UK, that huge working class in the beginnings in Germany under Bismarck. So that too is like a continuation of the French Revolution. And that's why I said when one of the Blanquists said, well, wait, let me find the quote here, because it's a really important quote. Okay, this was one of the Blanquists said, at the time, the Blanquists were the only thing they could be, Jacobin revolutionaries rising up to defend the threatened republic. And they considered the members of the International nothing but dreamers. So if there's no working class, what kind of socialism can you have? So, and there are some historians who say precisely that it was they were just artisanal workers. It wasn't really the working class yet.
Yeah, and I think, and now this is very much my analysis here, folks. I'm just going to disclaim that. This is like, I've been trying to keep to facts, but this is some analysis from me. I tend to think of both 1871 and Reconstruction in America in 1877, which I'm a more well-versed historian in, as much the end, like the beginning of the industrial working classes emergence into capital. Like there's this period in the 19th century when a lot of these workers are artisanal. This is my cat Robespierre here, by the way. She probably heard her name a lot. It's a lot of artisanal workers. Things hadn't really organized industrially, even on the railroads, which is like where steel shops or the factories in Paris. So I think that's, we get into definitions about what you mean by working class. Like if you mean, but if you mean an industrial factory proletariat, then I think it is debatable. If what you mean by working class is people who live by their wage at the bottom of society, then they were certainly working class, right? That's right. Okay.
Well said, Vicky.
Yeah. So we've got here somewhere. Oh my God! And now Zoom is going to freeze on me. Thank you so much. A few people were curious about the first moment at Montmartre, the women fraternizing with the National Guard and the cannons. That's a great famous scene. I don't know if you want to give a little more detail, but we've got a few people.
Well, I'll just read from the Sagae. I just
beautiful, perfect.
The passage marked off.
Great.
Okay, so as in our great days, the women were the first to act. Those of the 18th March, hardened by the siege, they had had a double ration of misery. So it was that Jacob had asked, why the women?
Yeah.
And there it was. They'd had a double dose of misery, did not wait for the men. They surrounded the machine guns, apostrophized the sergeant in command of the guns, saying, "This is shameful. What are you doing here?" Because the women, as as it was the case everywhere then and throughout history, they had been the ones who had to like wait in line for what little food there ever was. And they were taking care of the kids, and they were living through the siege and the bombardment. And so the women, they just took the bull by the horn, and there it was. So
yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was great. And I think the cannons had been purchased by subscription.
right.
I think one thing that's hard to understand often, I think, is that the National Guard at that point was both a revolutionary tradition from the French Revolution, and also was sort of a group, the National Guard in the US is obviously like just sort of a police force, but it had a much more complicated history in France involving its relationship to revolutionary action and resistance, which we don't have to get into, but
Right, but there is one element there though, and when my book, Voices of the Paris Commune, excellent book, everybody should be buying it.
Can recommend. Yeah.
Right, came out. I was interviewed by an anarchist in Seattle or Portland, one of those. It's not New York, so I don't know where it is. And so it's someplace out in America. And got in a very bad argument because he insisted the commune was anarchist, and it was based on the National Guard electing its officers.
Right.
But the National Guard predated the commune.
Right.
So it's hard, you can't give the commune credit for setting up an army where its officers were elected when it was something that they inherited. Now, what they did do was abolish the standing army, the regular army, and replace it strictly with the people in arms. This is what the National Guard was. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's also valuable too. There's this romantic telling that we have just participated in, of course, that like it starts on Montmartre when they declare the commune and it forms. But of course, these things are percolating for years. As you said, the National Guard has already formed on a relatively egalitarian basis. Political resistance to Napoleon is growing. There are Blanqui's 2 attempted insurrections, which were pretty small and pretty bad. But there's stuff percolating up. The myth around the 71 days, obviously based in historical fact, also ignores a lot of there's a few years of upheaval leading into the Franco-Prussian War, and then especially as it begins.
Right, and in fact, if we're ever able to travel again, and if we're ever able to travel to Paris, which is extremely unlikely. So I'm 69. I don't think I'm ever going to live to see the day that my wife and I are going to be able to go back to Paris.
I hope you're wrong, but yeah.
But also in Père Lachaise Cemetery, besides the Mur des Fédérés, where the commune made its last stands, is something that Vicky was one of the things Vicky was just talking about, is the grave of Victor Noir, who was an opposition journalist who was killed in a duel with a member of Napoleon's family. And this was the first huge, mass demonstration against Napoleon III, just a few months before the Franco-Prussian War. And I'm not making this up. If you go to visit his grave, there are graves in Père Lachaise Cemetery, like people do all kinds of bizarre stuff around Jim Morrison's grave, and people kiss Oscar Wilde's grave. People rub the private parts of Victor Noir's, on Victor Noir's grave is a sculpture of him laying dead. And if you look, his private parts are rubbed a different color because it's supposed to bring good luck. Just telling you, I'm not making this up.
That's good. I mean, sometimes you gotta rub a martyr's genitals to get good luck.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm taking one. It's gonna be quick and fun. Maybe not quite as fun as rubbing genitals, but which is someone has asked, and I'm really just doing this for myself because I always want to plug this. What are there depictions which are your particular favorites of yours? This is from Jean. Depictions of the commune in fiction or art that are particular favorites. We'll excuse you from answering the film you starred in, so you don't, no pressure to do that. But personally, I'm just doing this because I adore as a work of film and as a work of revolutionary history, maybe less so, but as a work of revolutionary agitation. Peter Watkins' La Commune from 2000, which is, I think, an absolute masterpiece. It's almost 6 hours long, and I think it flies by. I've seen it 3 or 4 times in my life already. I love it. It's a big thing to sit through, but I think it's incredible. It's a historical reenactment where he hired people from different political backgrounds and class backgrounds to live together and reenact the commune chronologically and then talk about it. I think it's fascinating. Do you have another answer? I just always love plugging Peter Watkins' movie. It's one of my faves. Huh?
Right. Well, actually, I have a different thing to plug, and it's hard to find, though you can maybe find it on Abe Books because it's out of print, and it's Jules Valaise's the 3rd volume of his autobiographical trilogy. Jules Valais was the great journalist of the Paris Commune, and he was actually one of the great French writers of the 19th century. And he wrote an autobiographical trilogy that New York Review Books Classics published the 1st volume. And as I was told by them, it was the worst selling book in the history of the publishing house. So though people have tried to get them to have me translate the 2nd and 3rd volumes, they were not going to do it. But the 3rd, if you can find the 3rd volume, the French title is L'Insurgé, and I think the English title is The Rebel. But if you look up Jules Valais, Valles, on Abe Books or some used website, that is the great account of the Paris Commune, because Valais was there. He was there, so it covers all the struggles before the Commune, the opposition, what the life was like of being opposed to Napoleon III, and also what it is to survive the Commune, because he was somebody who had the death penalty hanging over his head. And yesterday somebody asked, how did people not avoid getting killed? Jules Valais, as like so many people then, was famous for his big bushy beard, and he shaved his beard. And that was how he managed to survive, because nobody recognized him without the beard. So
yeah, strategic face modification. As we go to an era of having to wear masks and face paint to beat the surveillance cameras,
Right.
Things have gotten a little harder. But that's
Right.
it's always nice to see comrades in the past.
What about Lisa Garay?
Well, no, I prefer Valais. Lisa Garay, as great as the book is, we've been using the expression, getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
Because it's so much longer and it covers so much more territory, that if you're not, familiar with, the Republican opposition to the Second Empire, you can get lost in Lisa Garay.
Yeah, I've as someone I've read a lot on it, and I find that text pretty dense.
Right.
It's a lot like, I think, if you now were to read Jack Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World without any context about the Bolshevik Party, you'd find it nonsense. I think it's a lot like, it's really deep, intricate knowledge that is valuable. But anyway.
Actually, I just thought of another book, though, that's, because even Valais is a little bit like in the weeds.
Sure.
And I can't remember what the English title is, but I always recommend it. And it's by a French writer named Jean Vautrin, Vautrin. And the French title is Valais's newspaper, Le Cri du Peuple. But if you look up just Jean Vautrin, he wrote a great novel about the Paris Commune, a popular novel that came out just a few years ago. And it doesn't get too much into, the different parties under Napoleon III.
Yeah, and I also really love Louise Michel's autobiography. The Red Virgin is an incredible book, although it's about lots more than just the Commune.
Right.
Did the Haitian Revolution, Stephen Halpern asks, did the Haitian Revolution influence the Paris Commune in any way?
No, I haven't, Vicky and I discussed this the other day, actually. And it's unlikely, that it did.
Right.
But, it was on the other hand, the communards did hate both Napoleons. Napoleon II didn't live long enough for them to really hate him. So, that he sent the army down to Haiti to crush the uprising there, that he reestablished slavery. None of this stuff would have been things that the Commune would have been would have approved of, but I don't think that Haiti had any played any role. I've never come across a single mention of Haiti in this. But as we, Vicky and I spoke the other day, just as what Haiti and the Paris Commune have in common is they both became things that scared the ruling class.
Yeah.
So the Commune could always be used as exactly what's to be feared if the people are allowed to express their will. And in America, every time 3 slaves got together on a street corner, it was Haiti, and we have to arrest them or kill them.
Yeah.
So even an uprising like Nat Turner's, which was a couple dozen slaves out of set loose in the Tidewater. This became Haiti.
Yeah.
So they shared that same threatening image in their own separate ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I think one thing that is true is that there were both, I potentially Caribbean, but North African and Black. There were Black communards. I would love a more direct study of that. They were on the front lines, many of them from North Africa and from French colonies in Africa. But in terms of similarly a direct connection to the Haitian Revolution, I'm not familiar. And I think also, interestingly, to go back to the US where I was talking about, you do have this interesting disjunction where in 1877, I was talking about how they were scared of petroluces and there was all this talk about the commune. And in 1871, American industrial workers went on strike in solidarity with the commune, but famously at the same time were ignoring the South Carolina commune that was being done by Maroons and freed enslaved people. So very often these histories have been divided from each other, race versus class, obviously, in ways that I don't think is very responsible historically or helpful. We've got time for just one more, and then I have to feed this cat before she starts clawing my face live on the camera. But before we get into it, I just again want to thank everyone so much for coming through. Thank you, Mitch, for this conversation, and thank you for Wooden Shoe for having us as we get into this last question here. We've got a question about sort of internal divisions within the Catholic Church. So were there sort of, Catholic members who joined the commune? Was there any sort of liberation? And I think similarly, I don't know of any, but, bourgeois, I think it was a very divisive, the commune didn't have a lot of traitors in it, as far as we know. I don't know, maybe that's a concept you could speak to or think about.
Well, there was something that I've been forgetting to mention, and it actually relates to this question of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, it's unlikely there were many that, I'm sure there were believers among the communards, but the Catholic Church was most definitely the most militant voice against the commune, because they wanted to separate church and state. They removed crosses from classrooms. And among the 64 hostages killed in the final days of the commune was the Archbishop of Paris. So it's unlikely the Catholic Church would have had any pleasant thoughts about the commune. And, I talked about the tearing down of the Vendôme column. Again, anybody who's been to Paris, because none of us, even you youngsters, are going to live long enough to make it to Paris anytime in the future. But if you, since they've so totally fucked up everything, but if you go to Paris and you see Sacré-Cœur, and everybody goes up to Montmartre, and they go and they hang, and there's all the fake artists, and there's all the tourists up at Montmartre, and you're hanging by that beautiful, and you can see Sacré-Cœur no matter where you are. Sacré-Cœur was built where the generals were killed, and it was an act of expiation and a constant reminder of don't fuck with the church, because we're going to come back and we're going to haunt you forever. And so that the Sacré-Cœur is an act of revenge by the Catholic Church on the Paris Commune. So, and most people don't know that. You see this and it's just like another tourist site, but it's not. You know, Paris is charged with historical sites. Everywhere you walk, if you read Eric Hazan's books, you know, you're stepping on history everywhere you go. There are doorways you don't even notice when you're walking past where resistance fighters were killed. And by the Place de la République, you walk down the Rue des Fontaines au Roi, and there's a plaque saying that was where the last barricades were. And so there's much to, you know, every cobblestone in Paris bears a little bit of revolutionary history.
Yeah, there's just so much, there's so much more to say, obviously, about this. You know, this is a very short event. We didn't really talk about its relationship to revolutionary urbanism. I personally quite like the Situationist International's some theses about the Paris Commune, if you're interested in that, and interested in the relation of 68 to the Commune. There's a lot here that we maybe didn't have time to touch on, obviously, in the short window. But Mitch, you've got so many great books. Is there anything that you're working on right now with regards to the Commune you want to plug? Any books in particular that you think people should check out of yours? Please, you know, we don't have a bookstore to hand them to people, so
Right.
and sell them.
You should buy the Voice of the Paris Commune from Wooden Shoe. It's a great book. But also, I have another book on the Commune called Communards. Actually, right here. And it was something that you can only get it from at Marxist.org. I think Andy is probably going to give you, you know, and I get nothing from this book. I don't get any payment, but it's a really good book. You know, that after I did Voice of the Paris Commune, that became the book that I always plugged and that people could find in bookstores. But actually, Communards is a much longer book, and it's got a terrific variety of stuff. And so now what I'd like to do then is to end this, since it's time for us to end, with a quote from it.
Perfect.
And in it, it's from, for those of you who know French anarchism, the Reclus brothers were Protestants who, there were 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 brothers, all of them anarchists. One of them, Élysée, a famous anarchist geographer. And this was one of the Reclus brothers, and I can't remember because the names all begin with an E. So I think this is Élie Reclus, and he published a diary of the Commune. And this is what he wrote. There we go. This is what he wrote on the last day of the Commune, on May 28th in the evening. And this is the perfect way to end. If we don't triumph, we are mortal, but our cause is immortal. If we don't triumph, our children will be victorious, and if our children fail to, our grandchildren will succeed. It's more likely that civilization will perish than that our social ideal will. The old world is built on the privileges of idleness. The new is established and will be established on the rights of labor. In the past, labor was a slave. He became a serf, and now he's still exploited, but he will be free with all due respects to the bombardiers and murderers.
Vive la Commune.
Vive la Commune. So thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Vicky, thanks for this.
Oh,
Matt,
it was such a pleasure. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Matt. Thank you at the Wooden Shoe. Yeah, Matt, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, just wanted to thank you both, Mitch and Vicky, and I also wanted to thank PM Press, who really helped to make this happen, and just everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much, and apologies for any tech issues we had all coming together, but we recorded this, so hopefully we'll be able to share this recording, and you can share it with anyone who couldn't make it tonight. So thank you so much, everyone.
And if anybody has any more questions, you can find my email on all of my translations at Marxist.org. So, and I'm more than happy to answer. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye. See you. Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.